The reality is that this is a world full of temptation. We still have the sinful nature within fighting against the work of the Spirit of God. We are vulnerable children in a very dark world, and the Christian life is wonderful, but it's messy. We are being reshaped day by day into the image of Christ by the Spirit of God within, but we are all, each one of us, a work in progress.
Welcome to Encounter the Truth with Jonathan Griffiths. I'm Steve Hiller. Glad you've joined us today as we continue in our series, The Presence of the King. And Jonathan, I can just imagine some, and I'm going to put myself in this camp of people who would say, all right, I know that I am a child of the King. I know that I have been adopted into God's family and as his son or as his daughter. I know he's working in me, but man, why does it take so long? Why can't I be more Christ-like more quickly?
Well, I think that's a question that each of us grapples with who have been walking with Jesus for any length of time. You know, we begin with enthusiasm, and we have a genuine enthusiasm to follow him and to grow to be more like him and to say no to sin. And as we continue on in the Christian life, we recognize how very difficult that is and how very flawed and failing and sinful we are. And Jesus warns us that there will be temptations to sin along the way. The Christian life will not be easy and smooth sailing. And the warnings are helpful because we need to have a reality check and to understand what is before us in the Christian life. The warnings are helpful so that when we face temptation and we struggle and we stumble, we know that this is not a strange experience, but this is part and parcel of what it means to follow Jesus in a sinful world and still with the old nature within in our own heart. And in the message today, we're going to be considering some of the dynamics of facing up to the reality of temptation and continuing to follow Jesus through that challenge.
Well, let's get to the message then. Grab a Bible, meet us in Matthew chapter 18 as we continue the King and the Children of the Kingdom. Here is Jonathan.
Jesus wants me and he wants you to know that sin is dangerous. He wants us to have an appropriate humility, even a fearfulness before it. Now, it is possible for us to have a pretty arrogant attitude with respect to sin, an attitude that says basically, I know what I'm doing. I'm pretty wise to these things. I'm going to be fine. Just leave it to me. But Jesus says, no. You are in more danger than you realize, and you need to take far more steps of precaution than you think you need to take. He's realistic about the fact that you and I will be bombarded with temptation in this world. Verse 7. This is a fallen and a corrupt world, and there is evil all around us, and there is evil within us. Jesus knows the temptations will come and must come, but he warns us not to be cavalier and arrogant in our attitude to sin. He urges us rather to be cautious and to be humble, not to pretend, I've got this, not to imagine that we can handle the fire. He says to us more specifically to identify the danger zones in our lives, the areas and the situations where we are tempted to sin. He doesn't specify what those are. Any and every kind of sin is potentially in view here. You name it. Laziness, gluttony, greed, lust, jealousy, dishonesty, slander. We could go on. It's not pleasant, is it? But wherever we see that we are vulnerable to falling into sin, he says, take urgent action that might look embarrassing or foolish. Take urgent action to remove the source of danger. And to illustrate the point, he gives us this very shocking imagery in verses 8 and 9. If your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. If your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. Can you imagine? Tear it out, throw it away. What's he saying? Take urgent action to remove the source of temptation. Take action that will make you look shocking or absurd if you need to. Do whatever it takes, because the truth is you can't handle the temptation if you don't remove it from your life. There's a situation at work where you know you cannot trust yourself with the petty cash. You fear you might be tempted to dip into it when money is tight at home. Tell your boss, I do not want the responsibility. Embarrassing, but necessary. If gossip around the water cooler at work feels unavoidable, and you know you get into conversation that is not right, you need to stop going there. Stay at your desk when others gather. If there's a context where you would be tempted toward ungodly behavior with another person, make sure you're not able to be alone with that person. If alcohol is a problem, make sure it's simply not within reach. Get it out of the house. If the smartphone is a source of temptation, smash it, throw it away, use the landline. Do what you need to do. Now, it is a humbling thing to make drastic changes in your way of life and your patterns of life in order to avoid temptation. It's a humbling thing because others might notice, and it involves admitting that you cannot manage the temptation. It takes a childlike humility to say, this is too much for me, I am not managing. But in the end, it's worth looking weak. And it's worth looking foolish. It's worth looking maimed. It's worth being limited in some ways in your way of life because life and death are at stake. Notice the rationale that Jesus gives, middle of verse 8. It is better for you to enter life crippled or lame than with 2 hands or 2 feet to be thrown into the eternal fire. It is better for you, better, to enter life with 1 eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into the fire. Sinless perfection is not something that you and I will attain in this life, this side of heaven. We will stumble, we will sin until the day we die. And Jesus is not saying here that anyone who is not perfectly sinless is going to end up in hell. But he is warning us that sin leads to death. And if we are saying yes to sin, yes to sin, yes to sin, and if we are getting entangled in sin, and if sin takes hold and takes over, if we're not repenting of sin regularly and fighting sin, we are actually, here's the thing, we are not on the road of discipleship. We are on the road to judgment and to hell. And the true believer, the child of God, the kingdom person, sees the danger of sin, sees that sin leads only to death, sees how easily it takes hold, and the kingdom person learns to run the other way, to remove every temptation, to exclude every possibility. The kingdom person learns not to play with the flamethrower. Jesus is calling us to drastic action, to deep humility in the face of temptation and sin. He is calling us to be far more cautious and far more careful than we think we need to be. You see, here's the thing. It's fine with the flamethrower until it's not fine with the flamethrower. It looks okay until it's really not okay. And the burn, the danger, the damage, it gets serious quickly. And the effects can be life-changing and catastrophic. Now, Jesus, he thinks of his disciples as little ones. Remember, he is commending to us the image of childhood as a model of faith. And it's good here, I think, to consider ways in which children need protection from danger. When the first child comes into the home, there's a great flurry of activity in child-proofing the house, isn't there? First child, you're very, very careful. Second child, you're pretty careful. Third child, well, they'll be okay. It's not just us, okay. Stair gates are installed. Plastic covers are placed over the electrical sockets. The knife cupboard in the kitchen is locked shut. Precautions are put in place because children are easily harmed. Now, Jesus is saying here that you and I need to have a childlike humility to recognize that we are vulnerable to sin, that we are weak and we are not strong, that we are prone to danger, and we need some protection. So with that in mind, with that principle in mind, let me ask you, where in your life do you need to put in place a stair gate, a drawer lock, a protective cover? Where do you need to put a guard in place to keep you away from the potential of sin, the temptation to sin? It may be a place that's just too difficult for you, a relationship that only opens the door to ungodliness in conversation or activity. Maybe you know that if you buy a certain food and just have it in the house, it's going to be uncontrolled greed, gluttony. And you just can't have it there. Maybe you know that if you get talking with a certain group of friends, it's gossip, it's unwholesome talk, and you just need to back away when the invitation comes to meet up, to go out. Maybe the answer just has to be, no, I'm not going. Maybe you know that the technology you have is opening the door to lust and you need to remove the opportunity, or it's opening the door to addictive gaming or to unceasing social media scrolling, and you're dishonoring the Lord terribly with your time, and you need to get rid of the equipment or else you know you won't stop. Maybe for you, technology in one way or another is such a source of temptation, you need to get rid of the smartphone altogether. Maybe you need to cut your internet connection at home. Imagine that, a house in this era with no internet. Sounds outrageous to us, but isn't Jesus talking about drastic action? If I may paraphrase, if your fiber optic cable causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with no internet than to be fully wired and to be thrown into the eternal fire. Maybe you have a problem with money. Spending money, with indulging in that next purchase, that next treat, that next experience. And as long as you have the credit card with the big limit, you can't help yourself. But it's gone beyond carelessness now. It's now reckless. It is a shameful lack of stewardship. And the only option, you realize this, is to take scissors to that card, cut it in half, limit your spending capacity, get some accountability, do what it takes to reorder things. Imagine the idea, living in this era with no credit card at all. Too drastic? If your credit card causes you to sin, cut it in half, throw it away. Maybe social media is just a toxic place for you, as it is for so many people. You're filled with jealousy as you see others on Instagram and their perfect-looking lives. It's a mirage, by the way. You end up massaging the truth about yourself to present a better image to the world. You engage in gossip and in slander, and you say cruel things out there, and you mean to do better. You really do intend to do better, but you always slip. And maybe the only thing is to cancel the account and delete the app. I don't know what it is for you. I suspect you do. But we all have points of vulnerability in our lives. We're all little ones of faith. In a world full of temptation, where do we need to exercise childlike humility and to say, I need to take practical, even drastic action to remove the source of temptation?
You're listening to Encounter the Truth with Jonathan Griffiths and a message called The King and the Children of the Kingdom. Now, we're going to pause right here, but we'll get back to the message in just a moment. You know, we're able to bring you Encounter the Truth each day because of your generosity. So thank you for giving and supporting this ministry. And as you give a gift of any amount this month, we want to send you a copy of Jonathan's brand new book. It's called God Alone, His Unique Attributes and How Knowing Them Changes Us. Now, Jonathan's going to be with us a little later in the broadcast to talk more about this, so hope you'll stay tuned. But if you want to find out more or support the ministry right now, you can come to our website, encounterthetruth.org. Let's get back to the message. Again, here is Jonathan.
Jesus, he calls us to a childlike humility in our approach to sin. And finally now, Jesus calls us to a childlike humility in our approach to one another. Verse 10, notice it there with me. See that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. It's a verse I wrestled with just a little in my preparation. I couldn't immediately make sense of it. But the key here is to see that the little ones are the disciples from the previous verses who have had to take drastic action to deal with temptation. The disciple who's had to cut off a hand or a foot or gouge out an eye, as it were, to remove the source of temptation. The disciple who has had to seek out help to deal with an area of temptation, who has had to show humility in putting in place guards of some kind. And Jesus says here very interestingly, see that you do not despise one of those little ones. He says to the whole group of disciples, to the church, as it were, see that you do not despise them. And I read that and I think that's so interesting. I think that's so wise. I actually think that's so wonderful. You see, the truth of the matter, if we're being really honest about it, the truth of the matter is that we're all just a little bit of a mess, aren't we? Isn't that the truth? We're all sinners in partial recovery. We're all dealing with the wreckage of the fall in our own lives. And there is this danger that within the church, within the Christian community, we will present this slightly absurd, sanitized version of ourselves. You know the thing, we've got it all together. A church is a collective of people who have got it all together. And then when someone actually says, I'm vulnerable to sin. I'm struggling with temptation. I've stumbled in sin. I'm having to take some drastic steps to deal with temptation in my life. It can almost be too embarrassing to admit it because there is this collective front, and it's only a front because we're all dealing with the same sinful nature in our hearts. But there is a collective front that can lead to us despising the one who is doing what Jesus called for in the previous verses, taking drastic action with sin and with temptation. And Jesus says, don't do that. No. Those who are taking drastic action aren't second-class citizens in the kingdom. Remember who they are. They are children of the Father on their way to see him. The word angels in verse 10, it might refer to angels who watch over God's children and minister in his presence, or it might refer to the spirits of believers after death who will see the face of the Father. Elsewhere, Jesus speaks of how believers will in some respect be like angels when we go to heaven. Either way, and commentators differ on this, either way, the point is that God's little ones have access to his presence, have a privileged place before him. The point is to emphasize the worth and the value of each little one in the Father's eyes. And Jesus says, don't despise the believer who has stumbled perhaps, who has wandered perhaps, and who is now taking that drastic action with temptation. Don't despise them. They're privileged before the Father. They have access to his presence. They're precious in his sight. And now comes one of the most beautiful and wonderful moments in all the teaching of Jesus, I think, verse 12. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly I say to you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that never went astray. Now, when I first read those words in my study of the passage, I thought Jesus was talking about unbelievers, as he does elsewhere, that the shepherd is seeking out the unbelievers. But I realized from the context of the whole passage, both the verses that precede and the verses that follow, that he's talking about little ones that wander, about disciples that wander, about the brother who sins. Think of the next passage. And that realization made this so much more wonderful for me. You see, we all stumble in various ways. We all fail in our discipleship. We all sin. That is just the truth of it. We might wander a few feet off the path for a moment and then get right back on the path. Or we might be constantly tripping over the rocks on the edge of the path, but we never quite leave it. Or we might go right off the path into the weeds for weeks, months, years, even longer. And it's a huge question that we got to grapple with. What does Jesus do with the stumbling and the wandering believer? What does he do? See, when you and I stumble and we sin, we think to ourselves, here's the process of thought. See if this is familiar. We think to ourselves, it would be one thing for an unbeliever to behave like that, the way I've just behaved. But for me as a believer, that is a very terrible thing. I guess the Lord's done with me. He must be done with me. I don't deserve to be his child. I guess I'm done here in the kingdom. I guess Jesus is finished with me. Ever thought that? Ever felt that way? Well, what's Jesus going to do with me now? What's his attitude? What's his approach? Well, verse 12, his approach is this. He leaves the 99 and he goes in search of the one. And what does he do when he finds the one, when he finds us? Does he chastise us? Does he shame us? Does he make us feel the full weight of our worthlessness as we may feel it? Does he kick us out of the kingdom and tell us you don't ever come back? Notice it with me, verse 13. It's so astounding we wonder if we're reading this right. But here's what it says. He rejoices more over the sheep that went astray than over the 99 that did not. Isn't that remarkable? I tell you, as I approach this passage, in all honesty, I was not anticipating that. It came to me almost as a shock, but certainly as a wonderful surprise, a breath of gracious, fresh air. Jesus has a heart for the wanderer. He loves the wanderer. He pursues the wanderer. He rejoices when the wanderer comes home. Now, it would be great if the Christian life was a sanitized story wherein you and I come to faith and then nothing bad ever happens and we don't do anything bad. Wouldn't that be great? No more sin, no more wandering. I'd love that. Be so smooth, be so easy. The reality, however, is that this is a world full of temptation. We still have the sinful nature within fighting against the work of the Spirit of God. We are vulnerable children in a very dark world, and the Christian life is messy. It's wonderful, but it's messy. We are being reshaped day by day into the image of Christ by the Spirit of God within, but we are all, each one of us, a work in progress. We're growing, stumbling, we're moving forward mostly, sometimes backwards a little, and we're occasionally wandering right off the edge of the trail. But here is the wonder of the grace of Jesus. He's got his eye fixed upon us. He pursues the wanderer. He won't let the church despise the one who stumbles, who is dealing with sin. He's in the business of bringing us home to the Father. And here is why he does it. Verse 14. Here's the bottom line. It is not the will of my Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. That's it. That's the bottom line. The Father wants each one of us who belong to him to make it home. And Jesus is committed to bringing us there. Now, as a church family, as a people of God, we need to take seriously Jesus' call not to despise those who are addressing sin, those who perhaps have stumbled and are taking drastic steps now to get back on track. It's easy to take that attitude, I'm afraid, terribly hypocritical to do so, but all too easy. From my own perspective, I guess I know so many stories and so many situations within our fellowship, and I know individuals who are dealing with sin, who are taking some costly steps, who perhaps have wandered and who have come home. And I'll tell you, when I see members of the church family who I know are in that particular place and are here among us, prayerfully working at it and humbly seeking to grow and move forward, having had a reckoning with sin, I think there's more encouragement for me there than almost anywhere else. You see, it is a sign of the extraordinary grace of Jesus. It is an evidence of the heart of Jesus for the wanderer. And if you're someone who's wandered, I close with this. If you're someone who is wandering today and you think Jesus is done with you, and you think the church is done with you, can I ask you, will you please see the heart of Jesus here for the wanderer? And will you, in all humility, come home once more?
Jonathan Griffiths here on Encounter the Truth, and a message called The King and the Children of the Kingdom, part of our series, In the Presence of the King. And if you ever miss a broadcast in the series, come and listen online. Our website is encounterthetruth.org. Well, whether you listen to Encounter the Truth on the radio, through the app, or whether you're even listening online through our website, we're glad that you've joined us, and we're able to bring you Jonathan's teaching all these different ways because of your financial generosity. And as you give a gift of any amount this month, we want to send you Jonathan's book, God Alone. And Jonathan, this is a book dealing with the attributes of God. So what are you hoping that those of us who read the book will take away from it?
Well, really, the aim of the book is to point our eyes to the God who is our creator, the God who will be our judge, the God of heaven and earth, and to know him better. And I believe that in knowing him better, we will understand more of what it means to trust him, to follow him, to serve him, to wait upon him, to pray to him, to respond to his word. It's my belief that our deepest need in the Christian life is simply to know God better. He is the object of our trust and our worship. And I fear that many of us don't know him as we ought to know him. We're so naturally, and I speak personally, we're so naturally inclined to focus on ourselves and to think of ourselves and our practical needs. And even as we approach the Christian life, we come with a list of practical needs and practical questions that are very me-focused. But the aim of this book is to turn our eyes to God himself, that we might really know him, truly know him, in accordance with his word and delight in him.
Well, we want to send you a copy of Jonathan's book, God Alone, His Unique Attributes and How Knowing Them Changes Us. It's our thank you gift as you give a financial gift to the ministry this month. Find out more or give online at encounterthetruth.org or call us at 833-99-TRUTH. Again, the website is encounterthetruth.org and our phone number is 833-998-7884. For our producer Mark Brutta and our Bible teacher Jonathan Griffiths, I'm Steve Hiller. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us next time.